The pressure of the man's hand on her arm was a dead weight. It was hot and proprietary, the skin of his palm sticking to hers in the humid air of the reception hall. Ava kept her eyes fixed on the melting ice in her half-empty glass of water. She could feel his gaze on the curve of her shoulder, exposed by the dark purple fabric of her dress. He was leaning closer. The cloying scent of his expensive cologne, all sharp citrus and musk, made her stomach clench. This was Richard's father, Victor, her new brother-in-law's father, and he had her pinned against the gilded wallpaper of a rented ballroom. She had thought this was just a wedding, a lavish, slightly absurd spectacle for her sister, Isabella. She had thought the greatest danger was her mother's inevitable commentary on her dress, her career, her single status. However, the slow, deliberate way Victor's thumb stroked the inside of her wrist told her she was wrong. This was a different kind of danger, the kind that did not bother to hide itself. Her eyes lifted, scanning the room over Victor's shoulder, searching for an escape. She saw only smiling guests, shimmering dresses, and dark suits. Then her gaze landed on him. He was seated alone at a small table near the back, half shrouded in shadow. He was not smiling. He was watching, not her, but the room itself, with a stillness that was more predatory than any overt threat. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that made everyone else look like they were playing dress-up. A heavy gold ring glinted on his smallest finger. He held a glass of dark liquor, but he was not drinking. He was simply waiting. He was the most dangerous thing in this room, and he was her only way out. Ava took a breath. She shifted her weight, a small, apologetic movement to dislodge Victor's hand. He only tightened his grip. "Isabella is a lucky girl," he murmured, his voice a low rumble too close to her ear. "Beauty runs in the family." That was it. She made her decision. With a sudden, sharp twist, she pulled her arm free. She did not wait for his reaction. She walked directly toward the man in the shadows, her steps measured and certain, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in her chest. She did not stop until she was standing beside his table. He looked up. His eyes were the color of dark, worn leather, and they held no surprise, only a flat, assessing calm. A faint scar cut a clean line through his left eyebrow. She leaned down, her mouth close to his ear, the scent of cedar and something clean and cold, like steel, reaching her. "Please," she whispered, the word barely a tremor. "Pretend you know me." For a long moment he did nothing. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. She could feel Victor's eyes on her back, a burning point of furious heat. She thought he was going to refuse. She thought he would watch her get dragged back into the gilded cage and do nothing. Then, his hand came up and rested on the small of her back. The touch was firm, possessive, and utterly impersonal. It was a brand. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes lifting to meet Victor's across the room. He did not smile. He did not need to. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod was all it took. Victor's face tightened, his jovial mask cracking to reveal something ugly underneath, before he turned away and melted back into the crowd. The man's hand remained on her back. "Sit," he said. It was not a request. Ava sat. The chair was cold against her legs. She smoothed the fabric of her dress over her thighs, her hands trembling slightly. She stared at the polished wood of the table, at the way the candlelight reflected in his untouched glass. "What did he want with you?" His voice was low and gravelly, devoid of warmth. "I don't know," she answered, her own voice thin. "He was just being unpleasant." Victor is never just anything. He finally picked up his glass, swirling the amber liquid. "You chose your table poorly, little bird. My name is Ava." He ignored it. "You put me in a position. In my world, that creates a debt." She finally looked at him. "All I did was ask for help. You asked a man you do not know to claim you in front of his biggest rival. That is not asking for help. That is lighting a match in a room full of gasoline." He set the glass down with a quiet, definitive click. Now I have to deal with the fire. And so do you. He was right. She had run from a wolf straight into the arms of a lion. But the lion had not let go. He had made it clear that her escape was not an escape at all. It was a transfer of ownership. Marco, as she learned his name was, did not allow her to return to her family's table. He had one of his men, a silent giant named Leo, fetch her purse and wrap. He informed her, in that same flat tone, that he would be taking her home. When she tried to protest, to say she needed to find her sister, he simply looked at her. That was all it took. The argument died in her throat. They left through a private exit, bypassing the laughing wedding guests and the string quartet. The air outside was cool and damp. A black sedan, sleek and silent, pulled up to the curb. Marco's hand was on her back again, guiding her into the leather interior. The door closed with a heavy, final sound. It felt like the closing of a vault. The car moved through the city, the lights blurring into long streaks of color. He did not speak. Ava stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of her city transform into something alien and menacing. This was not the New York she knew. This was his New York. The car descended into a private underground garage and stopped. They rode an elevator in silence, the only sound the quiet hum of the machinery. It opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city skyline. The space was minimalist and severe, all clean lines, dark wood, and cold stone. It was a beautiful prison. "What is this?" she asked, her voice small in the vast, silent room. "This is where you will be staying," Marco said, removing his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a severe leather sofa. He rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in the faint, silvery lines of old scars. "I'm not staying here. You can't just decide that." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I can, and I have. Victor now believes you are with me, that you are mine to protect. If you walk out that door alone, he will see it as an invitation. He will take you and he will use you to get to me. Do you understand what that means?" She understood the threat in his words, but the reality was too monstrous to grasp. "Use me how?" A flicker of something, pity, maybe, or just impatience, crossed his face. "He will hurt you in ways you cannot imagine, slowly, and he will make sure I know about every second of it." The cold that had been coiling in her stomach turned to ice. This was real. The man at the wedding was not just a handsy executive. He was a monster, and this man, Marco, was the other monster who kept him in check. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would he do that over me asking you to pretend you knew me?" "Because it was not a pretense. The moment my hand touched your back, the moment he backed away, it became real. You declared your allegiance in front of his men and mine. You are a piece on the board now." Ava, he said her name, and the sound of it in his mouth was different. Carried weight. It sounded like a verdict. "My piece. And I protect what is mine." Over the next few days, the penthouse became her world. Marco was a constant, silent presence. He worked from a large office off the main living area, the door always slightly ajar. Men with hard faces and watchful eyes came and went, speaking in low tones. She learned to read the rhythm of the apartment. The quiet hours of the morning, the tense energy of the afternoon meetings, the profound stillness of the night. She tried to feel like a prisoner, but it was difficult. The apartment had everything. A stocked kitchen, a library filled with books, an art collection that could rival a small museum. But it was all sterile, untouched. Nothing felt lived in. It was a fortress, not a home. Marco himself was the same, contained, controlled. He ate his meals with her at the large dining table, the space between them a vast, empty territory. He would ask her questions about Victor. What exactly did he say? Did he touch you before that? Who introduced you? Ava, being an architect, was a creature of detail. She remembered everything. The way Victor had dismissed her brother-in-law, Richard. The casual mention of a new acquisition. A a shipping company down at the docks. She relayed it all to Marco, her voice even and precise. She watched as he absorbed the information, his dark eyes never leaving her face. One evening, he found her in the library, staring out at the glittering expanse of the city. He stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. "He killed my brother," he said. Ava turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, but his face was carved from stone. "His family. A deal went bad years ago. My brother, Luca, thought he could reason with them. He went to a meeting. Victor was there. Luca was honorable. They were not." He pushed off the frame and walked to the window, standing beside her. He smelled of cedar and the cold night air. "I was young. I told Luca to go. I told him it was the right thing to do. My mistake." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and heavy. It was the first piece of himself he had offered her. A wound that had never healed. She saw it then. This was not about business or territory. It was about vengeance. And she was now standing in the middle of it. That was the moment everything changed. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She had been given a reason. A dark, terrible reason that resonated with the injustice of what Victor had tried to do to her. Therefore, she made a choice. "The shipping company," she said softly. Victor mentioned the name. "Pyrrhus Logistics." Marco's head turned slowly. His gaze was sharp, intense. "He told you the name." He was bragging about how he took it from some old fool who didn't know its value. She held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. She was stepping over a line. "He said the first big shipment was coming in next Tuesday. He seemed very pleased about it." A long, charged silence filled the space between them. He was searching her face for something. Deception. Fear. He found neither. He found only the quiet resolve that had settled in her bones. He gave a single, sharp nod. He did not thank her, but she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She was no longer a liability he was forced to protect. She was an asset, a weapon he had not known he possessed. And that was infinitely more dangerous. The danger escalated 2 days later. Marco had insisted she not leave the penthouse, but a package arrived for her. A simple brown box addressed to her at her own apartment, forwarded by her building's doorman who had been given this address. Leo brought it in, his face grim. Marco opened it himself, using a small, wicked-looking knife from his desk. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single, dead purple orchid, its petals bruised and wilting, the exact shade of her dress from the wedding. There was no note. There did not need to be. It was a message. "I know where you live. I can still reach you." Ava felt a wave of nausea. Marco's face was a mask of cold fury. He closed the box and his hand went to his phone. The conversation was short, the words clipped and brutal. When he hung up, the silence in the room was absolute. "This changes things," he said, his voice a low growl. "He's no longer just watching. He's reaching." That night, she could not sleep. She wandered the silent apartment, the city lights a cold comfort. She found herself outside his office. The door was open. He was inside, staring at a framed photograph on his desk. She knew, without seeing it, that it was his brother. She was supposed to be afraid. She was supposed to be looking for a way out. But all she felt was a strange, anchoring calm. She had spent her life feeling like she took up too much space, her body a constant apology in a world that prized smallness. But here, in this world of violence and shadows, her solidity felt like a strength. She was not fragile. She would not break easily. The next day brought the real attack. Marco had to attend a meeting, one he could not miss. He left her with Leo, with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. But they did not come to the door. Ava was in the kitchen when she heard the faint scrape of metal on metal from the private elevator foyer. Leo heard it too. He drew a weapon from the back of his waistband, his body instantly transforming from a quiet driver to a hardened soldier. He shoved her behind him toward the pantry. "Stay here. Do not make a sound," he ordered. The elevator doors hissed open. There were two men. They were not subtle. They were here for a snatch and grab. The sounds were sickening. A grunt. The heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Ava pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a scream. She heard a man swear, then footsteps approaching the kitchen. The pantry door was flimsy. It would not hold. She scanned the small space. Jars of olives, bags of pasta, a rack of expensive wine. Her eyes landed on a heavy cast iron skillet on the lowest shelf. Without a second thought, she grabbed it, the weight of it familiar and solid in her hands. The pantry door swung open. A man with a cruel, pockmarked face grinned at her. "There you are." He reached for her. Ava swung the skillet with all her strength. The crack of iron hitting bone was shockingly loud. The man staggered back, his eyes wide with surprise and pain, blood suddenly gushing from his nose. He had not expected her to fight back. But the second man was there. He grabbed her from behind, his arm locking around her throat, cutting off her air. She struggled, kicking backward, but he was too strong. Her vision started to speckle with black dots. Then the front door of the apartment burst open. Marco was a blur of motion. He did not shout. He did not hesitate. The violence was swift, economical, and utterly terrifying. He moved like a surgeon with a scalpel. There was a sickening crack, and the man holding her went limp, collapsing to the floor. Marco was already moving to the first man, the one with the broken nose who was fumbling for a weapon. Marco disarmed him with a brutal twist of the wrist and then did something that made Ava's stomach heave. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Silence descended. Ava stood, gasping for air, the heavy skillet still clutched in her hand. Leo was on the floor, groaning, a nasty gash on his forehead but alive. Two other bodies lay still on the polished marble. Marco stood in the middle of it all, his chest rising and falling. There was a spot of blood on his cheek. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold, protective fire she had never seen before. He saw the skillet in her hand, the blood on it, and his expression shifted. Hotel security, alerted by a silent alarm, arrived moments later. Two uniformed men, their faces pale and nervous. They saw the scene and immediately reached for their radios. Marco stepped in front of Ava. "There was a break-in," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "These men attacked my staff and my guest. My security handled it." The lead guard looked uncertain. "Sir, we have to call the police. There are bodies." "My lawyers will handle the police," Marco stated. He looked at Ava. "Tell him what happened." Ava's mind was racing. Calling the police would mean questions. Reports. Her name, her sister's name, all of it dragged into this bloody mess. It would expose Marco. It would expose her. She had crossed a line when she had given him the information about the shipment. She had crossed another when she had hit a man with a skillet. There was no going back. She took a breath and found her voice. "He's right," she said, her tone steady, surprising even herself. "Two men forced their way in. They attacked us. Leo protected me." She did not mention Marco's lethal intervention. She edited the story, smoothing over the brutal reality with a plausible lie. Felt surprisingly easy. The security guard, out of his depth and clearly intimidated by Marco, finally nodded and backed away, speaking into his radio about a resolved situation. When they were gone, Marco turned to her. The fury was gone, replaced by something colder and more complex. He walked over and gently took the skillet from her hand, setting it on the counter. His fingers brushed hers. The contact was like an electric shock. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Done what?" "Defended myself." "Lied for me." He stepped closer, his presence filling the space, making it hard to breathe. "Now he will think you belong to me. Truly." Ava looked up into his dark, unreadable eyes. She saw the violence he was capable of. She saw the cold calculation. And she saw the flicker of something else, something fiercely protective that was aimed only at her. She was not afraid. "Don't I?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The silence that followed was the most honest confession he could ever make. He did not answer. He just held her gaze. In that moment, they both understood. She was his, not because he had claimed her, but because she had chosen it. But her choice came with a price she did not expect. The next day, a package was delivered not to the penthouse, but to her sister, Isabella. Inside was a photograph of Ava, taken through a telephoto lens, standing at the penthouse window. On the back, a simple, handwritten message. "Choose your family more wisely," Isabella called, her voice shaking with fear and anger. She demanded to know who Marco was, what kind of trouble Ava was in. Ava tried to explain, to reassure her, but the lie she had to tell was too thin. The conversation ended with her sister's heartbroken accusation. "You've brought this darkness to our door, Ava. I don't know you anymore." The line went dead. Ava stood holding the phone, the silence on the other end a gaping wound. She had thought she was protecting herself. But in tying herself to Marco, she had made her family a target. The cost of his protection was the very people she had wanted to keep safe. The guilt was a physical weight. When Marco found her, she was still standing by the window, the dead phone in her hand. She told him what happened. She expected him to be cold, to see it as a tactical problem. Instead, she saw a flicker of his own wound, the ghost of the brother he failed to protect. "This is my fault," he said. It was not an apology. It was a statement of fact. "I will end this." "How?" she asked, a desperate edge to her voice. "Victor has a weakness. Everyone does." He looked at her, a new kind of assessment in his eyes. "And I think you are the one who is going to help me find it." That night, she could not stop her mind from working. She was an architect. She saw systems. She saw structures and weak points. She replayed every moment of the wedding. Every word Victor had said. The bragging. The casual cruelty. He'd mentioned taking purest logistics from an old fool. He'd laughed about the man's sentimentality. How he'd refused to sell until Victor had threatened something he loved. It was a small detail, but it snagged in her mind. She went to Marco's office. He was there, a map of the city's port authority spread across his desk. "What was the thing the old man loved?" she asked without preamble. Marco looked up, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The man Victor took the shipping company from. He threatened something the man loved. It wasn't his family. Victor would have led with that. It was something else." Marco was still for a long moment. Then he moved to a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. He tossed it on the desk. The old owner was a man named Samuel Petrov, a recluse, no living family. His only passion was collecting vintage racing yachts. He had one, the Siren, that was his prize. It was his father's before him. Ava's breath caught. "Where is the yacht now?" Marco's eyes narrowed. He understood immediately. "It's in a dry dock at the same pier Purist Logistics operates from." Petrov refused to move it. Part of the deal was that it could stay. "It's not just a boat," Ava said, the pieces clicking into place. "It's his leverage. Victor is sentimental about his own victories. He kept it there as a trophy. And that first big shipment coming in on Tuesday, it's not for him. It's for the commission. He's using it to secure a seat at the table. If something were to happen to that shipment, something that made him look weak and incompetent, he would lose everything," Marco finished, a slow, dangerous smile finally touching his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "And if his trophy were to be destroyed in the process, it would be a personal humiliation he could never recover from." The plan was simple and audacious. They would not hit the shipment directly. They would hit the yacht.
En explosion.
A fire. Something that would look like an accident, but that would inevitably damage the nearby warehouse holding Victor's cargo before it could be officially logged and cleared. It would create chaos, federal investigations, and destroy Victor's credibility with the commission in a single, fiery blow. But they needed to get close. The pier would be heavily guarded. "There's a benefit gala," Ava said, her mind racing. A fundraiser for the Port Authority Historical Society is being held at the pier on Tuesday night to show off the new renovations. I saw the invitation on my sister's fridge. Marco looked at her, a new level of respect in his gaze. She was not just an asset. She was a strategist. The night of the gala was a blur of tension and glamour. Ava wore a simple, elegant black gown. Marco, in a tuxedo, was breathtakingly handsome and deadly. They moved through the crowd as a couple, a perfect picture of wealth and power. To everyone else, they were just another donor. But beneath the surface, a war was being fought. Ava's role was critical. She had to get the attention of the Port Authority director, a man known for his love of architecture, and keep him occupied on the far side of the venue, discussing blueprints for a new terminal. This would pull key security personnel with him, creating the window Marco's men needed. She found the director and began to talk. She was brilliant. She was charming. She spoke his language of load-bearing walls and aesthetic integrity. She held his complete attention. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Marco give a subtle nod to one of his men, who then slipped away into the night. 20 minutes later, a low boom echoed across the water. It was distant, but unmistakable. A moment later, a siren began to wail. A wave of panic went through the gala. People rushed to the windows. A column of thick, black smoke was rising from the far end of the pier. In the chaos, Marco's hand found hers. "It's time to go." They slipped out the same way his man had, into the cool, salt-scented night. From a distance, they watched the fire consume the siren, the flames licking at the side of the warehouse where Victor's future was turning to ash. It was over. Victor was ruined. The cost, however, was paid the next day. Ava met her sister for coffee. Isabella was pale and her eyes were red-rimmed. She slid a newspaper across the table. The front page had a grainy photo of the fire, but a smaller photo on the side showed guests at the gala. Ava and Marco were there, their heads close together. The caption was innocent, but the implication was clear. "Richard's family is in ruins," Isabella said, her voice hollow. "Victor lost everything. They think Marco did it. And you were with him." She looked at Ava, her expression one of profound betrayal. "Was it worth it, Ava? This man? Is he worth tearing our family apart?" Ava had no answer. The truth was too terrible to speak, and a lie was useless. The silence was her answer. Isabella stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Don't call me again." She walked away without looking back. Ava sat alone, the coffee cold in her cup. She had won. She had survived. But she had lost her sister. That night, in the penthouse, the silence was different. It was not tense. It was settled. Marco came to her as she stood by the window, watching the same city that now felt like it belonged to them. He did not touch her. He just stood beside her. "My brother would have liked you," he said quietly. "You don't flinch." He told her it was over. Victor was gone, exiled by the commission. The threat was gone. She was free. He had a car waiting. A bank account with more money than she could spend in a lifetime had been opened in her name. She could go anywhere, start a new life, disappear. He was giving her a choice, a real one. She looked out at the endless grid of lights, a city of millions of lives she no longer belonged to. Then she looked at the man beside her, a man of shadows and violence, whose world had somehow become her own. She thought of her sister's face. She thought of the skillet in her hand. She thought of his confession in the library. She had already chosen. Ava turned from the window and looked at him. She did not say a word. She simply reached out and laid her hand on his chest, right over his heart. She felt the steady, solid beat beneath her palm. He covered her hand with his own. His touch was no longer a claim or a brand. It was an answer. They stood there for a long time, in the quiet of the high rise, the burning city reflected in their eyes, bound not by words, but by the silent, irrevocable truth of what they had become.